Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Crybaby by Belinda Williams, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. Amy was just about to pop the cork off the champagne when her phone rang. She eyed the bottle apologetically, then retrieved her iPhone from the coffee table. When she saw who the caller was, she smiled. Her former coworker and close friend, Victoria, was one of the people she wanted to share her good news with first. Perfect timing, Amy said brightly when she answered. I was going to call. We've got a family emergency. Amy immediately forgot her news due to Victoria's businesslike tone. As editor-in-chief of a popular women's publication, Victoria was known for being efficient at the best of times. But there was no mistaking she was now in full-blown problem-solving mode. Whose family? Amy asked. Yours? Whose do you think? Amy bit back a grin, even though Victoria couldn't see her. Oh, the Pierce family. That would be the one. With her dry reply, anyone would think Victoria hadn't willingly married billionaire Seth Pierce in a small private ceremony barely a month before. Is Seth okay? She asked, immediately worried. Right here, she heard Seth answer. They must be in the car and on speakerphone. I'm fine, but my brother's not. Victoria will explain. In a minute, Victoria told him. Are you at home? She asked Amy. Yes. Why? We'll be there in 10 minutes to come pick you up if you don't have plans. Well, Amy eyed the champagne bottle again. It would keep, and now obviously wasn't the time to announce her news. I'd appreciate it if you are free, Seth said over the noise of the engine. Going by the deep drone in the background, Amy guessed they were in his top-of-the-line Range Rover. I'm free, but I'm still not sure what this has to do with me. You're good with children, Victoria said. Babies, specifically. I am? You're training to be a teacher, aren't you? Seth added. Amy looked over at her laptop. The email currently open on the screen had prompted the celebratory champagne. That's the plan, but I'm not going to be teaching babies. Near enough. Victoria said you basically raised your younger brother. That was an exaggeration. Amy had been 14 when her surprise little brother had arrived. At the time, her older sister had been engrossed in her final year of high school, and their father had worked long hours to support them. Amy had been the obvious one to help with Henry while her mother recovered from a particularly grueling labor. Not that Amy had minded. She'd always loved babies. Now that her brother was a smelly teenager, not so much. I'm comfortable with babies, if that's what you're wondering. Amy knew Seth well enough to appreciate that he wasn't asking. If Victoria was in boss mode, Seth had gone into CEO mode. Her friend's husband was usually laid back and charming, but he hadn't earned a place on BRW's young rich list by the time he was in his mid-30s from being timid. Does your brother have children? Amy asked Seth. She'd met all but one of Seth's 3 brothers and already knew those 2 didn't have babies. She tried to recall the unknown brother's name. Noel, maybe? He does now, Seth announced. Amy heard Victoria huff. We'll explain everything when we get there. Just get ready. We'll see you downstairs in 8 minutes, Seth finished. The line went dead before Amy could say goodbye. Noah paced the living room resolutely as though the action alone could stop the baby's crying. He glanced at the porta-cot where Amelia was lying and then immediately away again. It was hard to believe that earlier this morning she was a cute, gurgling 7-month-old who had giggled uproariously when he tentatively played peekaboo with her. Since then, he'd tried everything. She wasn't wet, she wasn't soiled, she wasn't hungry as far as she could tell, although the kid hadn't stopped screaming long enough to take the bottle, so he supposed it was a genuine possibility by now. He'd be hungry, too, from all that screaming. He recalled Beth saying something once about tired signs and that if you didn't catch them before they got overtired, it was all downhill from there. At the thought of Beth, a sharp knife-like pain cut through his chest, and Noah stopped pacing. He pushed a hand through his dark hair and vaguely noticed that it was oily and knotted. He dropped his hand to his side in disgust. He hadn't had a chance to shower last night when he'd received the call from the child care center where Amelia went. Jesus, Beth. He breathed, then collapsed on the sofa next to the porta-cot. Amelia was still crying. He very nearly sobbed, too. 1 minute, it had been a normal Tuesday. which usually involved an early start at work because that was always his way, then a late finish because that was his way too, home via the gym with leftovers waiting for him in the fridge. It wasn't an exciting existence, but at least it was predictable. Except he'd never made it to the gym or had the chance to do any overtime after he'd received the phone call. Instead, he'd headed straight over to pick Amelia up, and now, here they were. Amelia's chubby face was contorted into a mask of pure rage, bright red cheeks, mouth opened wide to reveal bare gums, and fists clenched at her sides. Noah tried to offer her a finger to grab, but she batted it away irrationally. He couldn't blame her. He'd be pissed off too. It was as if she knew her mother wasn't coming back, and Noah knew he was a weak substitute. Hell, he wasn't even a substitute. He was useless, completely and utterly useless. But right now, he was all Amelia had. With a ragged breath, he reached into the cot and scooped up the flailing baby, bringing her to his chest. She barely noticed. She just kept raging at him with that ear-piercing cry that was loud enough to have the neighbors knocking on his front door late last night. When he'd explained the situation to the couple he shared a wall with, they'd immediately switched from irritated to sympathetic and retreated with mutual looks of pity. Noah tried to bounce the baby in his arms like he'd seen Beth do, but he was so tired he was wary of dropping her. Amelia didn't seem to register his efforts anyway. Defeated, Noah carefully returned Amelia to the safety of her cot and resumed pacing. Seth and Victoria should be here soon. He hated asking his brother, any of his brothers, for favors, but he was way past pride by now. He was too consumed by grief and a growing sense of painful deficiency to worry about his ego. Luke had said he wouldn't be too far behind them, too. As the eldest, he had practically raised Noah and his other brothers after their mom had passed away from cancer, so surely he'd have some clue about what to do, especially since his daughter was nearing 10 years old by now. Luke had responded by saying that he'd been too busy building his business. He'd explained in a tone that denoted years of pent-up regret that his ex-wife had done most of the baby stuff. Noah still figured he'd have some idea. Any help would be better than this, since it was obvious all his efforts to soothe Amelia weren't working. For the first time in a long time, Noah wished his youngest brother lived closer. Tom was a couple of hours away in Newcastle, where he worked as a paramedic. He'd just bought a house with his fiancée, Chelsea. She was a childcare teacher, and Noah wished like hell she was here right now, too. Seth and Victoria would have to do for now. They were godparents to a recent newborn, so surely they'd have some sort of clue. Anyone would have a better clue than him. He was so absorbed in his own self-pity that it took him a moment to register that Amelia was no longer crying. He blinked and stopped pacing. Silence. Sweet, sweet silence. How long it had been since it was this quiet? Hours? But actually, if he was going to get technical, it wasn't 100% silent. He looked down at Amelia, who had a fist shoved in her mouth and was sucking on it loudly with big, wet, eager gulps. With relief, Noah was able to see Amelia's blue eyes again. They were red-rimmed and tear-stained and brighter than usual, but the sight of them eased some of the tension that had been twisting deep in Noah's gut. Eyes so like Beth's that it hurt and consoled him at the same time. There, he said softly. I've heard of kids sucking their thumbs, not their fists, but you do whatever works. With a loud smack, Amelia released her fist. Her eyes narrowed in frustration, and she glared at it with a look that appeared to be an accusation. Then she opened her mouth and howled once more. Noah sunk to the sofa again, his head in his hands. He had absolutely no idea what was wrong with her or how to calm her down. He'd never felt so powerless in his entire life. There was nothing he could do for Amelia right now, any more than he could do for himself. Beth's daughter was missing her mother, plain and simple. Hell, he still missed his own mother, and it had been over 15 years. He knew from experience that it wasn't something that could be soothed away. It might grow less painful with time, but it was always there. The moment you concentrated on it, the dull ache always returned. He watched Amelia crying in the cot with less despair now, more like resignation. Amelia was safe with him for the moment, but there was no changing reality. She would never grow up to know her mother.